Ricky Siegel is a certified sex therapist and educator, and his brother Larry Siegel is a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator. The Siegel brothers are here to answer all your questions about sex and sexuality that you are unsure of who to ask, including questions you didn't even know you had. They will also welcome guests around the globe to talk about a wide variety of topics and issues within the fascinating world of sexuality. Thank you for joining us and welcome to Sex Talk.
Good evening and welcome to Sex Talk with the Siegel brothers. I'm Ricky Siegel, a certified sex therapist.
And I'm Larry Siegel, a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator.
And my awesome big brother that I'm happy to be sheltered in at home with.
Yes, indeed. Same here.
We are happy to bring you Sex Talk, our weekly half hour where we talk about all things important in sexual health and keeping things sexy.
Absolutely.
We hope everyone is staying safe and sane and coping with the new normal, which is anything but. And as we discussed a bit last week, the ways of trying to look for the opportunity to re-look at our relationships and hopefully, ideally, put in some creativity and positivity and maybe work past some old squabbles and resentments and you know, as I've been saying for weeks now, we're all collectively suffering from adjustment disorder, and it's a very real thing. And this is a crisis, and it's not hyperbolic. This is unprecedented. We've never lived through anything like this, and it's not going to go away anytime soon.
No, and the best way to manage an adjustment disorder is with effective adjustment. So it's a really good opportunity to not only try to strengthen those relationships, but also to work on ourselves in terms of compromise, in terms of seeking win-win situations, in trying to resolve conflict effectively without having to win everything. Because even if you're in a good relationship, you know, again, like I think reminded people last time as well, this will end. Right? If you're in a relationship during all of this, you're probably going to still be in a relationship after all of this. Right? So we don't want to give people reasons for keeping score, and we don't want this to linger and continue to have a negative impact on the relationship. So please keep in mind, please remember that this is really our opportunity to maybe try different ways of working through and resolving our conflicts. You know, because many of us don't have the luxury of all kinds of room in the house to go and lick our wounds. So we really do need to try to find good, effective solutions, even if things aren't going well.
Right.
All right. So again, no shortage of advice for people as we're going through coronavirus. I do hope, and as we've talked about before, that you're also using this as an opportunity to spend real good, sexy time together. You know, spending time maybe erotically exploring each other in a way that you haven't before. I don't want to make it all around conflict and, you know, people dealing with problems and issues. This is also a great time to play.
Absolutely.
Right? If you have that time.
Yeah. And there's a lot of questions that people have and a lot of fears. And remember, it's really, especially places outside of like New York and New Jersey and the real places that have been peaking and seeing the worst of it. There's certainly no need for panic and understanding there's a difference between quarantine and sheltering at home.
Exactly.
And remember, not social distancing, physical distancing. Thank goodness we have all this wonderful technology that we can stay very, very. In fact, a lot of people I'm hearing are more socially connected because of being forced to stay at home. Even if it means in this virtual world, this is an awesome time for if we have to have a tragedy. Imagine if it were 40 years ago and we'd just be sitting around with the phone and the TV.
If you even had a phone or a TV, right? So, and again, worth repeating, and I'm going to add a slight little twist on that even if we use that term social distancing, we're not talking about isolation. Right? That point that you're making about we are sheltering, we're not quarantined. If you're sick, yeah, quarantine. But for most of us, especially, we're playing it safe. Right? And what we're doing is just trying to stay out of the way.
Right.
All right.
I'm getting word our guest is here.
Excellent.
Don, can you hear us? I see that he's logged in.
I can't hear anything yet.
Got vision. Do we have sound?
Can you hear me?
There you
wonderful.
are.
I love it when
All right.
Ready?
Life is good.
Don, it's really a pleasure to meet you.
Yes.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you too, and it's already a successful show because we're actually talking to one another.
That's right.
Yes, the technology's working. Apologies again for last week's little snafu, but was glad we had the opportunity at the end of last week's show to at least introduce you, and hopefully folks have tuned back in to listen to you to get it from the horse's mouth, because as I
all right, so we just met and you're already calling me a horse, so I appreciate that.
Well, again, in his defense, right now, having not met you, horse's mouth.
Right.
You, we go around
what do we got? We've got 20 minutes for you to start calling me a horse's ass. So usually only takes about 5 minutes. My students call me either Dr. Don or Jackass. Those are the students who really do know me. So.
Okay. Well, as we started to say last week, it was your article that I saw on Facebook that I just so moved and excited to read. My first thought was, we got to get this guy on the show.
I appreciate that.
Another kindred spirit, another guy working in sex ed that understands not only the frustration that we have this proven effective antidote to, as you said, not just sexual illiteracy and poor sexual health, but to poverty and depression and social justice issues that we as a country just continue to refuse to use. It's like offering someone a bandage who's bleeding and they say, no, thank you, I don't like your bandage, I'll just bleed to death. Right?
It is definitely sad, and that's what brought me originally into this so-called business. My training is actually in neuropsychology, and that's what my PhD is in. And hardcore basic research. My dissertation was on the visual system and the ocular motor system. But I had a secret that I was always doing on the side when I wasn't doing research, and the secret was teaching. And always was in love with the classroom, but I thought what I was supposed to be is a research scientist, and that's about it. Well, I've been lucky for over 30 years to be in the classroom, and have taught probably 12 different courses in psychology, and quite by accident, I taught my first human sexuality course, and I think now about 23 years ago. And it truly was an accident along the lines of the chair of the department contacted me it was a Wednesday or a Thursday, and said, the person who's teaching human sexuality can't teach that course anymore. Could you teach it for us? Now, I am an amateur when it comes to sex. Never taken a human sexuality course. No training, formal training in human sexuality, but I thought I'd help out my chair and say, absolutely, you know what, I will become an expert as long as you stay one chapter ahead of your students. You're an expert. So what he had failed to tell me at that time was this was a flex course. And I don't know if the listeners know what a flex course is, but you do 16 weeks worth of information. So a full semester's course in only 8 weeks. Right. So this course wasn't starting 8 weeks from now when he was asking me. No, he was asking me on a Wednesday or Thursday. The course was starting on a Monday. So I
Oh, well,
prepped
you
my
time on
first
that
human
one.
sexuality course in about
Yeah.
4 or 5 days.
Wow.
And after teaching that course, and not even really after, I mean, during teaching that course, with all the courses in psychology that I've taught, and psychology is the best thing that you can teach anyone because it makes a person stronger. I was just flabbergasted by the misinformation that is
Right.
around when it comes to human sexuality. So, it's taken me maybe 23 years to figure this out, but there's a lot of things about the human condition that I am so fascinated by, especially when there's objective truths associated with
Mhm.
human behavior. And here's one objective truth about human behavior. We talk as human beings more wrong about sex and sexuality than any other topic. And I'm going to add a
Mhm.
word to that. And the word
Mhm.
that I'm going to add to that is we intentionally talk wrong about it. Physicians
Yeah.
intentionally talk wrong about it. Our K
Mhm.
through 12
Yep.
education system talks
Absolutely.
intentionally wrong about it. Our parents talk intentionally wrong about it. Our
Mhm.
religions talk intentionally wrong about it. And you use the word frustration. I probably shouldn't be talking about frustration and sex at the same time here. I don't want to personalize it. But from an educational perspective, this is what has motivated me for the past 23 years. It'd be one thing if we were talking intentionally wrong about how many planets are in our solar system. And someone's telling, well, there's only 5 planets in our solar system. The ramifications, the consequences of that for the rest of your life is going to be near zero. But if
Right.
someone
Mhm.
talks intentionally wrong about who or what you are sexually attracted to, or who or what
Sure.
your gender is, or how
Mhm.
you fall in love, or how relationships that form are going to be completely different than long-term relationships. This is where, beyond frustration, I get angry. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
being an idealist 23 years ago and now just being a frustrated old man today, 23 years ago, I said, yeah, well, we can change the
Mhm.
system. And how we can change the system is to educate people one person at a time. And here is the deal. I get lots of different people in my classes. I mean, and this is a true statement. The age range in my classes is between 16 and 75. And
Beautiful.
these
Yeah.
people come
Same
in
here.
with lots of different opinions,
Mhm.
lots of different beliefs. And one of the
Mhm.
things that they all have in common is once you start talking objectively about sexuality, I mean, the light bulbs go off. They start going, "Oh, my goodness, why weren't people telling me about this before?" And
Well,
so
if let
now
me
they
let
become
me jump
just,
in here for a minute.
go ahead.
Okay, because I
Go
think,
ahead.
and I want to use you as both an example and an exception. Okay, because
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
in what you've gone through and your process, and and again, you see the issues, you know it, you've become educated and knowledgeable in this area. But the way you started, right, again, I think this is another unspoken type of social justice issue. There is no other academic discipline. There is no other course that you would ask somebody to teach on a college and university level that they had no experience in.
Right.
Okay, could you imagine somebody coming into a biochemistry class or a math class or
Yeah.
Right.
any other class
Yep.
that's
Yep.
never taught that before, and then just would you go pick it up? Now,
Yeah.
again,
It's a,
you
it's a,
are
it's a,
the
it's a,
example and the exception here, but how
yep.
many people are
Yep.
becoming the source of all that misinformation because they're just not qualified to do this?
Yep.
And there's a
Yep.
prejudice
It's a,
against the feel that you need to be qualified.
it's a
Yeah.
perfect example. And I think that's a nice segue to look at America's current K through 12 sex education system.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
literally 30 states today, as of 2020, can teach anything they want when it
Right.
comes to sex education. And what I mean by that is there are no policies relative to the content being medically based or science based.
Being medically accurate.
30
Well,
states.
And well, a step further, I think it's 13 states that actually have legislation that specifically stipulates it does not have to be medically accurate.
Oh, absolutely. So exactly what you just said there. Who could teach a human sexuality class? Well, as long as I've got opinions about it in K through 12 education, certainly I could teach it. You know, this idea of an expert. Well, an expert, as far as I'm concerned, the best expert is the best definition of amateur. The original definition, the actual definition of amateur, is someone who loves their discipline at its core. Well, an expert, and as far as K through 12 education is, as long as I have opinions about it, you know what? I'll bring it right into the classroom.
Right.
Wow. A lot of things that I do.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. That was the analogy. I was gonna use an analogy. Imagine if you did that for any other topic. Imagine you did come into a class and you were a mathematician and you said, you know what, 2 + 2 is 5, and you're teaching that K through 12. And you know what? We could play around with this analogy. Addition and subtraction exists. Multiplication and division does not exist. That's what we do. And as far as an analogy is concerned with sex education, in which we say, here's the 3 topics we're going to cover. And the topics we're going to cover are reproduction, sexually transmitted infections, and marriage from a heterosexual perspective. That's what sex is. That's what sexuality is. What? Right. One of the things I love to do with students, I love to do with just human beings. Here's another objective. I'll go up to just about anybody. That's why I don't have a lot of friends. I'll go up to anybody who's willing to talk sex, and I'll ask them.
Sexologists meet each other.
Right. And I'll ask a simple question. So I say, so what do you think what do you think sexuality is all about? And more people than not say, well, sex is about reproduction. That's what, the biologists tell us. And so that's what it's about. I said, yeah, absolutely. That's a component of sexuality. But what do you think is the primary motivator of sex? And they're like, I just told you, it's reproduction. So here's the thought experiment. You ready for this thought experiment? So I say, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to calculate the number of times you have had and will have sex over your entire lifetime. Now, don't say it out loud. Put that number in your head. Whether that number is, 5,621, and that was just this past weekend, or 3. Put that number in your head. And now what I want you to do with that number, I want you to tease from that number the number of times that you will have sex for reproduction reasons alone. Okay? Right. So now you've got this one number of all the times you're going to be having sex over your life. Now you have this number associated with the primary reason you had sex for reproductive purposes. Now I want you to tease from that original number the number of times you'll have sex for the reason of pleasure. Now all I want you to do is compare those 2 numbers. Right. Which number is larger? For that matter...
How many of those people with the first question is the number actually 0, since more often than not, pregnancies are unplanned?
Absolutely. So, and now that they have these 2 numbers in their head, and I'm like, okay, so which number is large? Which number is way, 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 way bigger? Now the biologists are willing to tell you that sex's primary purpose is for reproduction. If that is the case, holy moly, do us human beings have it all screwed up. And as far as the number of errors we are making when it comes to sex, give people just that one analogy. Boy, do they start thinking. I don't care what political affiliation, what religion, how old you are. It provides a bridge for what I would say 99.99% of people want to do is they want to talk about real sex. They want to talk about authentic sex.
Mhm.
They don't want the analogies. They don't want the euphemisms. They want the
And they don't want the
reality.
reproduction.
Right.
No,
The time they
no,
don't want that.
no.
They want the pleasure. They want all those things that it brings. And that really is part of that selective, I'm going to say also religious-based view that sex has always been really presented as, that sex is for reproduction. Remember that panel of priests I had a debate against years ago?
Oh, yes, indeed.
Kind of game, set, and match, when I simply asked them, if sex was only about reproduction, why did God invent a clitoris?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they really had nothing to say.
Well,
kind of over.
and what's so sad about that? So I run a YouTube channel as well, so I've got to plug that. It's called 5MI Weekly, the number 5, and then the letter MI, and then weekly. It stands for 5 minutes of intercourse weekly. We all need to talk at least 5 minutes about sex, all right? One of the videos is exactly that. So one of the videos I do is I look at the history of sex education. And with the history of sex education, I go all the way back to the Greeks and Romans and start talking Plato, and then work myself through the Old Testament. And when you're working your way through Genesis, especially talking Adam and Eve, it's fascinating.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and all the major world religions, at least from a Western hemisphere perspective, they certainly take credence in that Old Testament, especially the first 5 books. When you look at Genesis and Adam and Eve, of all the things that were going to be the most evil, God picks you being aware of your body being nude. Huh? Read Adam and Eve. Wouldn't you put murder up there? Wouldn't you put thievery up there?
But even with that, now my first question when somebody talks about Genesis is which chapter? Because different chapters, different story. But I mean, I think there is a very good lesson we can take from that, because the punishment came not because they were aware, but because they were ashamed. And the irony is that what got them in trouble in the first place, being ashamed of their nakedness, which was the sin. Sin meant selfishness back then, not good or bad. It wasn't a moral judgment. The selfishness, they made their shame more important than the gift they were given. And the irony of most religions, that's what started it all, and that's what virtually every religion continues to perpetuate.
And here's what we've got to overcome. So I've yet to do it, but and what allowed them to be shameful? What allowed them to be shameful was the knowledge that they were nude. So by eating from that apple, and by the way, totally throw Eve and all women under the bus too. She did it. That's a whole other story. That knowledge. So this idea is when it comes to sexuality, you should be denying your knowledge. Huh? What?
There you go. That's the continuation.
And that's what we've got to overcome.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. And you know, we're going to probably be running out of time shortly. We're kind of getting out. So
it usually takes me about 30 minutes just to introduce myself. So
us too.
Absolutely. So in terms of, again, looking at that bigger picture, and I think that's such a great takeaway right there, that, you know, kind of maybe reframe that sort of religious foundation there, and maybe look at as an opportunity to not continue that shame, not continue that negative body relationship that so many people have. Because obviously that's not what God wanted, if that, you know, for people to kind of believe that way. So let's kind of be more in line with that.
And I come from the line of thought. So there's implicit learning and explicit learning. And so when we talk about human sexuality myths, they're affecting us in an implicit fashion. And even if And I have, a lot of people say, I don't read the Bible. That doesn't have an effect on me. It's the basis of our culture. And until you make that explicit and concrete and say it out loud, just like with a stereotype or a form of prejudice, until you recognize and say, oh, okay. You know what? I'm built to have this implicit bias against one of the 4 F's: feeding, fighting, flighting, and sex. Why do I have this implicit bias against sex that's negative? Oh, this is making sense. My culture reinforces this, and I am part of my culture. So if I can say something out loud, I can start to have an effect on it. I can start to change for the positive.
Wonderful. And let me borrow a word that you used at the top of all of this, and looking at how we are passing on these biases and misinformation. If we want to make this shift, if we want to kind of have a much more positive relationship, let's do it intentionally.
A perfect word.
We have been talking with Don Lucas, family and sexuality educator and old friend we've just now met.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I loved it.
We'll be back next Friday and every Friday for more Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers.
Have a great week. Stay smart, stay home, and please stay safe.
You've been listening to Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Join us on WNN 1470 AM and 95.3 FM, or watch live streaming video at AMP2 TV Productions on Facebook, or look for the shows on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again next week.
The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its